She was just a little girl with a big dream, growing up far from the flashing lights of Hollywood, never knowing that one day her face would be known all around the world. Millie Bobby Brown was born in Spain to British parents and moved around a lot, finally ending up in England and then the United States. Her family wasn't rich, and they had to work hard just to support her dream of becoming an actress. They believed in her, even when it seemed impossible. Millie started going to auditions, facing rejection after rejection, but she didn't give up. And then something happened that would change her life forever. She was cast as Eleven in a show called Stranger Things. At first, no one knew if the show would be a hit, but when it came out, everything exploded. People couldn't stop watching. Her shaved head, her serious face, and her powerful performance made her a star overnight. The world fell in love with this mysterious girl with powers, and suddenly, Millie was everywhere. She was on magazine covers, talk shows, red carpets, and social media. But what people didn't see was the pressure behind the fame. Millie was only 12 years old, and now millions of eyes were watching her every move. At an age when most kids were just going to school and making friends, she was being dressed up like an adult, posing for cameras and being asked personal questions by strangers. People talked about her looks more than her talent. Grown adults on the internet gave their opinions about her body, her clothes, and her dating life. Even though she was just a child, she was being treated like a grown-up. Slowly, the smile in her early interviews started to fade. Her words became more careful, more scripted. She seemed nervous, like she was always being watched. And maybe she was. Fame came so fast that it didn't give her time to understand what was happening. And while many people celebrated her success, others were quietly asking, was this too much too soon? The truth is, the industry loves to build up young stars, but it doesn't always protect them. For Millie, the early spotlight wasn't just exciting, it was also confusing, and maybe even dangerous. As her fame grew, so did the control around her. Some fans noticed that her social media started to look more like a brand than a real person. Her posts were polished, perfect, and often not written in her own words. It made people wonder, who was really speaking for Millie? Was she still that girl who just wanted to act? Or had she already lost her voice in a world that moves too fast and expects too much? The early success of Stranger Things gave her everything she thought she wanted, but it also came with a price that very few understood. This was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one filled with silence, secrets, and questions that no one in the industry wants to answer. Because when a child star rises this fast, and the world watches without blinking, something dark can begin to grow behind the scenes. And for Millie Bobby Brown, that darkness may have started much earlier than anyone thought. As Millie Bobby Brown's fame continued to grow, something strange began to happen, something most people didn't see right away. At first, it all looked like a dream. Red carpets, magazine covers, awards shows, and interviews with famous talk show hosts. She was smiling, waving, and answering questions like a pro, even though she was still just a kid. But slowly, under all the lights and glamour, cracks started to show. The same people who once cheered for her now began watching her too closely. The media and the public started talking about her in ways that made many people uncomfortable. They weren't just talking about her acting anymore. They were talking about her appearance, her clothes, her makeup, and even her personal life. Grown adults were writing online comments about how she looked, making videos and articles about what she wore, and asking questions that no child should ever have to answer. Suddenly, her childhood seemed to disappear in front of everyone's eyes. She was being turned into something she wasn't ready to be. Her photo shoots became more mature, and her outfits started to look less like a teenage girl's and more like something out of a fashion magazine meant for adults. It wasn't her fault. It was the way the industry works, pushing young stars to grow up faster than they should. And Millie, still trying to find out who she really was, had to do it all under a microscope. Every time she posted something online, thousands of people would comment, judge, and criticize. Some would say she was acting too grown up, Others would say she was being too childish. No matter what she did, someone always had a problem. It was like she couldn't win. And behind all the smiles, it started to look like Millie was feeling the pressure. Her interviews became shorter, her answers more careful. She didn't seem as relaxed or as free as before. Some fans noticed her looking uncomfortable, even scared when certain questions came up. There were awkward moments during live interviews when reporters would cross the line and ask about things that had nothing to do with acting. Some even asked about her love life, even though she was barely a teenager. It was shocking, but no one seemed to stop it. The people around her, agents, managers, media handlers, were supposed to protect her, but instead it looked like they were just trying to keep her brand shiny and perfect. The question grew louder. Who was really looking out for Millie Bobby Brown, and why was the world so quick to let this happen? Some people started speaking up online, saying the media needed to stop treating her like an adult. But by then the damage was already being done. Her image was being shaped by people who cared more about attention than her well-being. Behind the scenes, things weren't as pretty as they looked. And the more famous she became, the more it seemed like her real self was being hidden. Fans who followed her from the beginning started to notice changes, not just in her style or voice, but in the way she acted around people. She wasn't just growing up, she was being shaped, managed, and maybe even controlled. Her childhood, which was supposed to be full of learning and freedom, was being used to build a powerful public image. And while the world kept watching her grow, very few stopped to ask if she was okay. This wasn't just a story about fame, it was a warning about what happens when a child becomes a product. Millie Bobby Brown was no longer just a young actress. She was a brand, a business, and a target. And behind the flashing cameras and red carpets, she was still just a girl, trying to hold on to her voice in a world that didn't always let her speak. As Millie Bobby Brown got older, fans began to notice something they couldn't quite explain. It was like the girl they had once known was slowly disappearing, not in the way a child grows into a teenager, but in the way someone's real voice starts to fade away. In the early days, Millie spoke freely in interviews, laughed easily, and said things that felt honest, like they were coming straight from her heart. But over time, that spark began to change. Her answers became shorter, more controlled, almost rehearsed. It was as if someone was always watching, always listening, making sure she said the right thing, wore the right thing, and posted the right thing. Some fans said it felt like she was no longer speaking as herself. Others wondered if she was being trained to speak a certain way. Her social media also began to feel different. It was no longer the fun, casual posts of a teenager sharing her life. Instead, it looked more like a carefully crafted advertisement, filled with brand deals, polished images, and captions that didn't always sound like her own words. People started asking who was running her accounts. Was it really Millie, or was it a team behind the scenes managing her every move? And if that was true, what were they hiding? Why did it seem like her real thoughts and feelings were being filtered, shaped, or even erased? The more people looked, the more they began to question what was happening behind closed doors. It wasn't just about being famous anymore. It was about control. In Hollywood, young stars are often surrounded by teams of adults, agents, managers, publicists, who say they are there to help, but sometimes they control more than they should. Fans started to wonder if Millie was just another example of a young celebrity being turned into a product. Everything from her appearance to her public words seemed polished, perfect, and safe. But safe from what? Was it to protect her, or was it to protect the image others had created for her? In one interview, Millie looked visibly uncomfortable when asked a personal question. He paused, looked at someone off camo, and gave a vague answer. The moment passed quickly, but fans didn't forget it. It was a sign, maybe small, that something wasn't right, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't allowed to speak freely anymore. People also noticed how her public appearances began to slow down. She wasn't doing as many interviews as before, and when she did speak, she avoided deep or emotional topics. The girl who once seemed so open was now guarded, careful, and distant. It raised questions no one in the industry wanted to answer. Was Millie Bobby Brown being told what to say? Was she being told what not to say? And if so, who was behind it? Some people pointed to her management. Others whispered about the power of big studios and brand deals. Because when a young star becomes as famous as Millie, there is a lot of money involved. And with that money comes pressure, rules, and silence. There are people who don't want the truth to come out. People who benefit from keeping the public image perfect, even if the person behind it is struggling. There are stories in Hollywood about young stars being managed so tightly that they feel like prisoners in their own lives. They can't speak freely, they can't post without approval, and they can't make choices without permission. Could Millie be living that same story? It's a question no one dares to ask out loud, but it hangs in the air like a quiet warning. Even her fans, the ones who love and support her, began to feel a distance growing. They missed the old Millie, the one who laughed, joked, and seemed so full of life. Now, they saw a girl who looked tired, careful, and hidden behind a wall she didn't build. Some believed she was simply growing up. Others believed something darker was happening. A silence that wasn't natural. A silence that was being forced. And if that's true, what is it that Millie Bobby Brown isn't allowed to say? What secrets lie behind her carefully managed smile? The more people ask, the more mysterious it becomes. Because in an industry where image is everything, the truth often stays buried. And for Millie, the cost of staying silent might be far greater than anyone realizes. As time passed, the silence around Millie Bobby Brown started to feel louder than ever, and it was no longer just a feeling, it was a pattern. People began to notice how carefully her life was being controlled. Every time she appeared in public, her words felt rehearsed. Her smile looked forced, and her presence seemed distant, like she wasn't truly there. Fans who once felt close to her now felt like they were only seeing a version of her, one that had been shaped by people behind the scenes. Some even started calling it the Millie they want us to see. But who were they? That's where the mystery deepens. Behind the cameras, behind the interviews, and behind the social media posts, there were whispers of something darker, something people in the industry didn't want to talk about. Rumors began to spread, not just among fans, but even among people who had worked with her, people who claimed she was being silenced, not by force, but by pressure, contracts, rules, and fear. Some former insiders suggested she wasn't allowed to speak her mind freely anymore, that anything personal or emotional had to be approved before it was said out loud. There were stories of interviews being edited, questions being removed, and even entire appearances being canceled at the last minute because someone felt it wasn't safe, for her image, for the brand, or for the people pulling the strings. There were claims that if she said the wrong thing, she would face punishment, not in public, but in private, where the real control happens. And slowly, the girl who once seemed so full of light and energy began to fade into something more quiet, more distant, and more controlled. One of the most chilling moments came when she spoke in an old interview about how she felt constantly watched. She said she couldn't even walk through a hotel lobby without people staring, commenting, or trying to get something from her. It was a moment of truth, short but powerful, where you could see the weight on her shoulders. But after that, she stopped talking like that in interviews. She became more careful, more polished, and people began to wonder, did someone tell her to stop? Was that the moment they decided she was saying too much? The idea that she might be silenced on purpose became harder to ignore, especially when other young stars from different shows and movies began sharing their own stories, stories of being overmanaged, stories of being told to stay quiet, stories of being forced to follow scripts, not just on camera, but in real life. Millie never said anything like that directly, but maybe she didn't have to. Maybe her silence said enough. Her social media, which used to feel lively and real, turned cold and perfect. She still posted, but the posts didn't feel like her anymore. They felt like they came from a company, not a person, and fans started to ask, what happened to the real Millie? Where did she go? Why did it seem like her real personality was being hidden? One photo would show her laughing, but the caption would sound like it was written by someone else. One video would show her talking, but the words felt safe, distant, and approved. It was as if everything was being filtered before the public could see it. But why? What was there to hide? What was the industry so afraid of? These are the questions that no one in Hollywood wants to answer, because the truth might be too uncomfortable. Maybe it's not just about Millie. Maybe it's about the system, the machine that takes young stars, puts them in front of the world, and then shapes them into what sells the most, no matter the cost to their mental health, their freedom, or their identity. And maybe Millie is trapped inside that system, trapped by fame, trapped by expectations, trapped by people who promised to protect her, but instead chose to protect the money and the image. Some say she has spoken out in small ways, quiet interviews, short videos, cryptic posts, but nothing loud enough to break through, because maybe she knows the risks. Maybe speaking too honestly could ruin everything she worked so hard to build. Or maybe she's waiting for the right moment to speak, waiting for someone to ask the right question, waiting for someone to truly listen. Until then, we're left with silence. And sometimes silence is where the biggest truths hide, in the quiet moments, in the things not said, in the eyes of someone who wants to scream but has been told to smile. And that's the mystery. Why can't Millie Bobby Brown speak freely? What is she holding back? And more importantly, who is stopping her from telling her own story? Because if someone like her, one of the most famous young stars in the world, isn't allowed to speak her truth, then how many others are being silenced too? In the middle of all the silence, something unexpected began to happen. Millie Bobby Brown started to change, not just in the way she looked or dressed, but in the way she moved through the world. After years of being watched, controlled, and carefully managed, she began doing things that made people wonder if she was quietly trying to break free. It started with small signs, things that didn't seem like much at first, but slowly grew into something harder to ignore. She launched her own beauty brand, which gave her a new kind of power. She wasn't just the face of someone else's company anymore, she was now building her own. Some saw this as a normal step for a young star, but others saw something deeper. They saw a girl who had been silenced for years, now creating her own space, where she could speak in her own voice and make her own rules. Then she started talking more about mental health and the effects of fame, not in loud or dramatic ways, but in small moments that felt real. In interviews, she would mention how hard it had been to grow up in the spotlight, how she felt misunderstood, and how sometimes she just wanted to live a normal life. She even spoke about walking away from social media more often because of how toxic and hurtful it had become. These moments felt honest, and for many fans, they felt like little cracks in the wall that had been built around her. But the question remained, was she really free to say what she wanted, or were these safe, approved versions of the truth? The mystery only deepened when she started showing up less in Hollywood events and more in quiet places with people she trusted. She seemed to be pulling away from the industry that made her famous. Some believed she was taking control, finally choosing who she wanted to be, without letting others decide for her. But others warned that the industry never lets go so easily. They said that even if Millie was trying to step out of the spotlight, there were still people behind her, watching, planning, and guiding her every move. That maybe this new version of her was just another image, carefully crafted to make it look like she was free when she still wasn't. And that's what makes this story so hard to understand. Because we don't know where the truth ends and the image begins. There was even talk that her team was still filtering her interviews, still approving her social media, and still shaping her message to the world. But if that's true, then what is Millie really feeling behind the scenes? Is she scared to speak out? Has she tried and been shut down? Or is she just waiting for the right time to tell her story in full? Some believe her silence is not weakness, but strength, that by staying quiet, she's protecting herself until she's ready. Others believe she's still trapped, still being told to smile, stay calm, and never say too much. One thing is clear: this isn't just a story about fame anymore. It's about control, identity, and the struggle to be heard. Millie Bobby Brown may be one of the most recognizable faces in the world, but we still don't really know what she's been through. We don't know what she's kept hidden. We don't know what she's not allowed to say. And that's the part that keeps people watching, questioning, and waiting. Because one day, maybe she will speak without fear. Maybe she will tell us everything. Maybe the truth behind all the silence will finally come out, and when that day comes, the world may not be ready for what she has to say. Until then, we're left with a quiet rebellion, a mystery behind a smile, and a young woman who might be stronger than anyone ever knew.